Welcome all to Leadership Fort Worth's 2020 Leadership Outlook event. My name is Ramon Guajardo Jr., and as Leadership Fort Worth's board president, I want to welcome all that have chosen to spend this afternoon with us in learning what the future of automation holds for our community and how it's being utilized and developed within the companies that operate in Fort Worth and the North Texas area. As most of us all over the world have adjusted, we too at Leadership Fort Worth have adapted to our current environment. We are hosting our Leadership Outlook event virtually for the first time. Thank you to the Leadership Fort Worth staff, board, retired executive director, and alumni that have played part in making this event happen. On behalf of Leadership Fort Worth, I want to recognize and thank Hillwood as our presenting sponsor, University of Texas at Arlington's Goolsbee Leadership Academy as our leadership sponsor, and Mauser Electronics as our silver sponsor. I also want to thank Frost Bank, University of Texas at Arlington Research Institute, better known as UTARI, K&L Enterprises, Texas Capital Bank, Rommel Company, KFM Engineering, and Stantec. It's because of these great sponsors that allow Leadership Fort Worth to provide events like these annually. If you want to partake in future sponsorship opportunities, please feel free to contact myself, a board member, or visit leadershipfortworth.com. As we come together today, I want to touch on the importance of community trusteeship as Leadership Fort Worth views it. Each year, Leadership Fort Worth prepares 8th graders to young and established professionals to experienced presidents and CEOs of our community to become better community leaders. From within our schools to our respective place of business to our community events, Leadership Fort Worth is ensuring that each participant of our program is empowered to leave a positive mark on our community for future generations to promote and expand on. Applications for our Leading Edge in Leadership class are being accepted now. So please visit our expo booth here on Hoppin or visit leadershipfortworth.com for more information and how to apply. Before we begin our Leadership Outlook program for this afternoon, we want to take a short time to network and share our thoughts of the importance of community involvement. We have the pleasure of sharing today with the students of University of Texas at Arlington's Goolsbee Leadership Academy. To partake in this networking, I ask that everyone please click on the sessions button on the left side of your screen and select an industry-specific chat session to participate. You will see a session for finance and accounting professionals, a session for entrepreneurship, a session for STEM field, and one for sales and marketing. Once in the session, we have designated moderators to assist with navigating the conversations. All right, we will see you back here at 4:20 to begin our program with our panelists. Thank you.
Leadership Fort Worth has really planted their foot in diversity and inclusion in an amazing way.
You could clearly tell in the room when all of us, more than 50 of us gathered, that it wasn't simply by accident, right? That the directors of the program, all of the staff really put that front and center.
When we hear those ideas, you hear their perspective, you understand where they're coming from. That's the diversity I think we all need a little bit bigger taste of.
I was surprised to see the amount of professionals that looked like me or were from different backgrounds. And so I think, Leadership Fort Worth was taking that initiative to try to be more inclusive and show the diversity that we have in the city of Fort Worth, and seeing the classes that have come after me, I think they're continuing to head in the right direction.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed conversing and sharing experiences and thoughts on community involvement. Thank you for our session moderators. We appreciate your assistance with guiding the meaningful conversations. I would now like to direct our attention to our program. And with that, I'd like to introduce our program moderator, Hayden Blackburn. Hayden Blackburn is Executive Director at Tech Fort Worth. But some may also remember him as the Director of IdeaWorks Fort Worth. Hayden is also an active board member for the Near South Side Inc. and the Fort Worth Public Library Foundation. If you haven't met him before, I recommend getting to know him soon. Welcome, and thank you, Hayden, for your commitment to this program. And with that, I turn it over to you.
Okay, perfect. Ramon, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation to join in this conversation, very timely conversation around autonomy and mobility. And thank you to Leadership Fort Worth. I have not hired him to be my hype man, but I absolutely appreciate it. And I'm also a proud alumni of Leading Edge back in 2016. And so it's a pleasure to be here and share. There's a lot to uncover, and I'm really excited about the panel that has been put together today, from everything from the lab and directly at the research to the startups that are innovating within this space to the people that are building the environment that is allowing those to thrive and test and prove these technologies, and the corporates that are expanding their capabilities through autonomous systems and autonomous mobility. So without further ado, I would also like to thank Tiffany Morgan, who's really behind the scenes helping all of this be produced and organized. I'd like to have all of our panelists come up to the stage and join us. There's no better people than themselves to give a quick introduction and connect with what their specialties are. So we've got Robert up here so far, and then Ashley Curry from BNSF, Dr. Nicholas Gans from UTA's Research Institute, and waiting for one more, Russell Laughlin from Hillwood. But as we wait, Ashley, you want to start us off? Quick introduction and what brings you to this topic.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here today. I'm with BNSF Railway. I've been with the railroad for 9 years, and I actually started in our agricultural products group and held various sales and marketing roles, and then moved into industrial products in various marketing sales roles, and am currently in our domestic intermodal team and helping lead that group. And BNSF has been focused on innovation for quite some time, so hopefully have some good topics and things to share with you all today.
Excited to dive into it. Thank you for being here. Dr. Nicholas Gans.
Hello, thank you for the invitation, and thank you everybody for attending. I am the Division Head of Automation and Intelligent Systems at the UT Arlington Research Institute. Prior to that, I was a professor in the Electrical Engineering Department at UT Dallas. The AIS group at UTARI, well, UTARI is a applied research center that's associated with the University of Texas at Arlington. We do research with faculty members, with local companies, with companies in other states. We do research that we go out and solicit funds from the federal government, state government. So, and the AIS division, as the name might imply, is concerned with robotics, unmanned vehicles, computer vision, machine learning, and a lot of other related topics.
So good to have you here. Robert.
Hey, thank you, Hayden. Pleasure to be here. Robert Brown, I'm Head of Government and Public Affairs here at TuSimple. People are probably like, what is TuSimple? We are developing self-driving trucks, big rigs, to solve that middle mile segment. We had our first entree into the Dallas last year with our pilot in the the United States Postal Service for 2 weeks running between Phoenix and Dallas, and now we're putting some roots down there and growing with our friends at UPS and a few others. And what Ashley's doing, is incredible with her, what they're doing from an innovation perspective and kind of that ecosystem that Nicholas is a part of from higher education and workforce development. So excited to be here, excited to answer a few questions, and looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. And hopefully we can get our fourth panelist up here. So we'll keep an eye on that backstage chat with Tiffany and see about that. But we have so many angles that we can take on this. I mean, a best place to start, because I mean, this is something that's in the news almost every day, if not every day, in a wide variety, is to just kind of set the course for, in as layman's term as possible, of what we're really talking about. Autonomous systems, autonomous mobility. Robert, would you like to kind of dive into, especially from y'all's lens around long haul trucking and vehicles, what that really means to you?
Yeah, happy to. So what we are developing, and you're right, we get a lot of coverage. And I always like to remind people, TuSimple has a little over 40 trucks in our fleet. And if you add up all the companies in the United States doing this, we're talking less than 100 trucks. But if you read the news, it sounds like, the robots are coming, so there's a lot of hype and a lot of excitement around it. Obviously for the safety benefit, but also the business side of it, increasing that throughput. I mean, nothing can be more poignant than what happened during COVID to our supply chain. When you don't have essential items in your grocery store and you can't get it, and everyone's gone to online shipping and clicking, and everyone expects in 2 days. It's stressing our supply chain. Our friends at Burlington Northern, they're doing an outstanding job, but there's only so much capacity that you can generate, and trying to increase that capacity in that middle mile, or extending that intermodal ramp, for both Burlington Northern is the go-to-market strategy, not just for TuSimple, but the whole industry, right? If you can increase that throughput, and when we talk about driverless trucks, I don't want to think that there's no more truck drivers, because there's a complete, there's segments of the route that would be driverless, but we would need drivers to do all the things that drivers do best, the customer service, the store puts, and all that kind of stuff. So what we are developing, and the industry is developing, is we work with our partners at International. They're owned by Navistar, for those who don't know, who make the International brand truck. And over the next few years, we're developing this truck to be commercially deployed nationwide in 2024, 2025. And, again, very exciting. We do it with partnerships. We do it with some people that are, visiting us here today. And it is it's a great, truly transformative technology if we can pull it off, not just from a TuSimple perspective, but from an industry perspective as well.
Absolutely. And you kind of touched on this. I mean, there's this kind of autonomous driving levels, 0 to 5. Some of us maybe even driving level 1 vehicles and not even really know it and label it that. I mean, y'all's trucks, what level are they really aiming to operate?
Yeah. So I always tell people, focus on the even numbers. That's the key. Level 2 systems are, you could argue, are, if you're at your Cadillac Super Cruise, some of the, what Tesla's doing, it's driver assist, but it's required human is the fallback. Level 3, I always tell people, if anyone pitching you guys a level 3 system, kick them out of the room, because it's quite dangerous from the human factors perspective. The level 4 is where it gets interesting. It's where, whether it's Waymo operating a driverless taxi in Chandler, Arizona, or TuSimple operating from Phoenix to Dallas, it is driverless. Granted, in the future, driverless, but within the operational design domain. So there's limiting factors of where the vehicle can operate, whether it's road type, weather type, if it's snowing, that kind of thing. So it's driverless within a operational design domain. What level 5, which if you have anyone in the audience with the CES a few years ago, that was promised all of us in a few years that we'd be jetting around in our robo taxis and our own personal vehicles, is not happening, and is not happening in the near future. And level 5 is the theoretical that an autonomous vehicle would be able to operate where any human can. And that type of compute and that type of technology just isn't here, regardless of what you might read in the papers. So focus on the even numbers, 2 and 4, is where all the exciting stuff is happening.
Good tips. Well, and to continue on that vein of kind of the theoretical and the safety piece, Doctor, would you kind of lay the land as far as what you're seeing in, just the lab and in this industry, as far as the approach to safety, efficiencies, and effectiveness of these types of technologies?
Thanks, and please call me Nick. So I am probably focused on a smaller scale than either Robert or Ashley, that we are working on specific technologies and specific research problems in order to enable the autonomy levels that Robert was just talking about. So we work on computer vision problems, recognition of objects or obstacles, how do you do path planning, how do you ensure safety, which is what you were just asking about. So a lot of times this is split into two different sets. One could be called verification and the other is validation. So verification is when you have algorithms that you can offer some sort of a guarantee on performance. And these guarantees are often rigid in the sense that they are restricted to say that when you have good weather conditions, when you have good lighting conditions, when there is smooth flow of traffic, we can guarantee we will stop in time 99% of the time. And you're trying to be as precise as you can, but then you can offer these sort of verifiable guarantees of the algorithm itself. There's a lot of mathematical analysis that often goes into this. And, we spend a lot of time on that stage. Then the validation stage would be where you go out and you test and you actually make sure that what you are saying you can do is what you can actually do, and you actually then go perhaps and start to push the limits. And so what happens when you relax the requirements that you were previously using for the guarantees on your algorithms? And I would enjoy hearing what Robert and Ashley have to say about their opinions and their experiences with those.
Yeah, Ashley, what's it been like for BNSF really diving into autonomous solutions and starting to implement those?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can speak to some of the investment in technology BNSF has been doing as we're focused on improving safety and promoting efficiency within our facilities and across our network. So injecting capacity into networks, as Robert on too. One of the things that we're doing is doing back actually as early as 2007 was we implemented automated gate systems, gate movement of truck vehicles in and out of our hubs, which our hub is considered our endpoint for where a unit or a container originates or terminates. And with this technology, a truck can pass through and come into the facility in a little over 2 minutes. Then we advanced and used a RailPass mobile application app that actually took that driver time down to just a little over 30 seconds. And advanced from there using a QR code. And now we're actually even integrating some touchless technology and testing that in our South Seattle facility, which could virtually reduce any need for a truck to stop. So I think all that, that testing and that just shows that we are working to advance with the market and, setting ourselves up to be enablers and be able to use some of the new technology to support our current business as well. One of the other areas that we've tested too is in our Logistics Park, Kansas City facility. We are actually using what we call AutoStrads to move containers to and from truck chassis, as well as to and from container piles. And it's really neat because this is the first time that we've tested that any road has really tested using this technology for 53 containers. It's been tested on the international side, but for this size of containers, it's just really exciting project for BNSF to be a part of.
Excellent. Yeah, and I mean, that just makes me think of the Mobility Innovation Zone up in Alliance and what's going on up there. I see Russell in the chat. Hopefully get him on stage here pretty soon. And everybody in the audience, keep sending those questions in. We will get to those as we kind of progress and move through the conversation. So we definitely want to see those. And we do have some protected time later to really tackle a lot of your questions into that. So, I mean, even with some of the questions that are coming in. So, Robert, one of the first ones from the chat, what investment is needed in infrastructure to have these systems on the road?
Great question. There is a lot of stuff, and we're working with University of Texas actually on a connected vehicle, phase 2 of that very problem, that very answer to ask. So shout out to them and Texas DOT on that. But the vehicles today and the vehicles in 2024, and I'd say the majority of the vehicles, even out of my competitors, we're designing it to operate safely on current infrastructure. So infrastructure as itself, we cannot rely on whether it's V2X or V2V or 5G or any of that kind of world from a safety critical path. And Nick will know about this, from a functional safety perspective and a redundancy perspective. The vehicles have to be able to, what we call, basically, it's called minimal risk condition, but get the safe harbor, right? If something were to go wrong, the vehicle has to be able to pull itself over on the side of the road. Also deploy those pesky safety triangles. But that's an engineering problem as well. But yeah, I mean, do we love clear lane markings? Of course, clear signage. But the general talking point I like to use, whether it's talking to legislatures or highway infrastructure owners, what's good for human drivers is good for autonomous vehicles. We don't like potholes. We don't like things like that. So if you're going to invest in infrastructure, invest in stuff that will benefit human drivers as well, because we don't want folks to be investing in roadside call boxes, right? And it to be obsolete, or the technology shifts and that kind of thing. And from a functional safety and a reliability perspective, we can't rely on anything from an infrastructure perspective to deploy from a safety perspective as well.
Well, that question also applies to kind of BNSF, is what kind of infrastructure is needed to really start to use these? I mean, great examples from Seattle to Kansas City. Did it take much to really get into it?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And railroads are responsible for upgrading and maintaining infrastructure. And so BNSF invests every year extensive amount of capital dollars just to maintain that infrastructure. So technology and automation is actually another way that we think we can create efficiencies and not only provide a good overall customer experience, but also infuse capacity into our network and into our intermodal hub facilities.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what Ashley's saying, despite what a famous electric car company CEO has said, threatening like how autonomous trucks and electrification are threatening the rail, I actually think rail is set up as a real winner when it comes to autonomous trucks because of the natural and the regulatory kind of duopolies that has created the rail system. You're opening up new markets, for the rail and railheads, and extending that ramp and increasing that throughput, because the amount of density that rail can get is anything that really truck can compare. And if automating that yard that Ashley and team has done up in Seattle, I've seen it, it's incredibly impressive, and I mean, you're talking thousands of touch points and increasing that throughput, that customer service, that hub in Dallas, could potentially really increase that throughput, and reach the customers' doorsteps at a much higher and safer rate.
Nice. Well, and Nick, and something that we had talked, we were prepping is for all of those people out there that watch The Good Place, you were introduced to the trolley problem. And that may be the first time of being introduced to this as like a key example of safety, but you even went further and just like the social impacts of autonomous and kind of what this looks like when it comes out into the real world. Imagine driving down the street and seeing an autonomous vehicle driving down, and may have some uneasy feelings about that. So what is it that you're seeing in both research and the industry that is starting to evolve in that space, and kind of what happens as far as a society?
Thanks. So I am involved in research on these topics. As far as the trolley problem goes, I think it's important to understand that the point of the trolley problem is that there is no correct answer, that different people will bring different values and different experiences to that problem, and will select different solutions. Robert and Ashley can say whether they are specifically tackling this problem, but for instance, I did see interesting research where they did a large number of interviews and surveys with people, and people want the autonomous vehicle to be utilitarian. And in the trolley problem, which if anyone's not familiar with it, It's if a vehicle has to choose between two bad outcomes where it kills one person or kills a number of people, what should it do? And there's variations of, well, what if, should it kill the driver or should it kill a pedestrian? You know, and there's this infinite number of permutations, and that's why there's no correct answer. But people want their autonomous vehicles to take a utilitarian approach and do what is for the best for the most number of people, or what is bad for the least number of people. But interestingly, people themselves do not make these decisions that way. And so that's kind of interesting that people, they want their robots to act like robots and to be very logical and to take the utilitarian approach. And I absolutely would like to hear if Robert are actually working on this. To your other question, which is the broader point of what happens for social impacts, societal impacts, and then also these values. So each of us as engineers, we're bringing our own values into these problems. And as we work on things, we have our own biases and blind spots. And so one of the things that a lot of research groups work very hard on is trying to determine when there is bias that they don't intend to introduce. So you have a machine learning algorithm, and then you train it in a certain set of scenarios. You can easily overlook other scenarios that just due to your own implicit bias that you don't realize are things you need to be checking. And that can be from the fact that if most of these companies that are working on these problems have been working out of California and Arizona and Texas, then they're going to be biased towards certain landscapes and environmental conditions. That's one thing that we're really interested in is how do the individual people who are working on these problems bring their own perspectives and values into the solutions. And then in terms of social impacts, Robert also touched on this, which is the concerns that if we are bringing in autonomous trucks, what happens to the people who are currently driving trucks? And you know, I assume also that they are looking at this problem, and I think that's something that people should be aware of and know that engineers and scientists who are working on these systems are thinking about these things. That's something that we as a society need to be looking ahead on and really understand that there is going to be adjustment. As you talked about people being nervous about seeing a autonomous vehicle next to them. That certainly is the case. But these vehicles are on the road. You may not see them very often here, but if you go down to Austin, there's a decent chance you'll see them. And if you go on to the Bay Area, there's a good chance you'll see them. And there so certainly is a need to be more comfortable with them, understand what they might be doing, but also there will be ramifications of economics and employment that will occur to these.
Yeah, we had a great question in the chat from Bobby Williams about how do we ensure the equity of automation and access? I mean, it's just another aspect of the social impacts of these types of technologies and how they're kind of introduced. So, Robert and Ashley, do you want to kind of expand on any of the points that Nick was bringing up?
Yeah, it's a common question. It's usually kind of more towards the folks that are kind of developing that passenger centric, because you do have like transportation deserts within our city centers that aren't served, that are underserved communities, and kind of like, you know, people look at it. You're kind of this. Hey, there's my buddy Russell.
There you go.
Excellent.
The kind of dystopian world, right? It's just a bunch of rich people's, you know, toy to play with, and you know, and automation doesn't solve, you know, that transportation and mobility problem for underserved communities. But there are a lot of great companies out there, and I'll give them shout outs like May Mobility and a few others that are trying to focus and partnering with municipalities on delivering autonomous, you know, kind of they're smaller vehicles, but they're designed for public transit. You know, for TuSimple and kind of over the road type stuff, ours is B2B. So it's a business relationship that we have with, you know, whether it's, you know, BNSF or, you know, UPS and that kind of thing. So it's more of a business to business type of relationship. But yeah, when you look at, you know, automation and automated vehicles long term, you know, what kind of powertrain are they using? Where are they? What communities are they serving? Should municipalities put requirements on, you know, these type of companies on who they serve and how they serve them? So it's a great question, and it's something that is at least, you know, the industry is thinking about it. You know, you go to a lot of the same conferences. We discuss this stuff, but you know, how do you solve those you know, transportation deserts with autonomous vehicles? Because you in theory, right, you have that lower cost to deliver a much greater access to public transportation and mobility.
Yeah, and I can't speak specifically to the trolley comments, but I can say that with everything that BNSF does and explores, do it with safety first in mind, and that's the most important. And that's what we'll continue to do as we explore the technologies that we look to utilize in the future.
Excellent. Well, Russell, it's such a pleasure to have you on. We lost video, but love to hear a quick introduction. And I mean, we've just been really waiting to dive into the Mobility Innovation Zone.
Well, you had the A team right there. So Hayden, thank you first. And hi, Robert. Hi, Ashley. Hi, Nick. How are you? So I was in the session, but got blocked out somehow coming across. And you guys are doing a great job without me. I'll just hop off and you can finish. How about that? Well, Hayden, so I'm Russell Laughlin, Executive Vice President with Hillwood Development Company. We developed our signature project is obviously Alliance, Texas, 27,000 acre master plan community. It's a logistic-based inland port enterprise, and I've been doing transportation for 30 years. The last 4 years leaning into the automation of mobility and logistics, both surface and air, which brought us to partnership with TuSimple and others, and we're looking forward to talking about that today.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, perfect timing from one of the attendees. I mean, they just put it right out there. Does Hillwood have an avenue for unmanned system startups, small and medium-sized companies to get involved with the Zones project?
Yes, we do. So as part of the, what we call it the Alliance Texas Mobility Innovation Zone, a distinction for a little background first. There are many, I call them MIZ or Mobility Innovation Zones across the country, whether they're large companies or private institutions. Those are research, R&D, proof of concept, early stage investment. Alliance Texas and our MIZ is a commercialization platform. To wit, TuSimple is the first to commercialize long distance automated trucking. So as you go into our two platforms, it's surface and air being the UAS component. Many of you will know that we formed a partnership with Uber 3 years ago, launched Uber Elevate. That included Bell Technologies, formerly Bell Helicopter. That has developed into a flight test center at Alliance on the north side of the airport, which is being utilized now by contractors, Department of Defense contractors for UAS testing certification. To tell you for the audience, that's the long pole in the tent. It is the air certification organization by NASA and FAA. There's quite a bit of ways to go there, but a lot of really good folks showing up.
Yeah, the Uber Elevate story was hard to miss. You had to really work to not hear about that around the community, and it's exciting to see that. Along with the MIZ, I mean, Jim Griffin in the comments mentioned that Arlington, Texas is using autonomous vehicles for public transit. UTA is a location for the proving ground across the state as well. So, I mean, each of y'all are kind of really coming together around this whole subject in different angles. And I'd love to hear the story of when TuSimple and Hillwood got connected. And when, Robert, y'all are mapping out kind of your phase one across the Texas and the Southwest.
Well, I've been chasing Russell probably around conferences for about 2 years. I feel like, we always would run into each other and talk. And I have to give a shout out to our friends at the Postal Service, because originally when we pitched them, we're like, oh, let's just do a pilot between Phoenix and Tucson, and it'll be a nice, that was kind of where we were, as a kind of a nice, area that we knew well. And they're like, no, we want you to stretch your legs. And we have a route we run daily. It's ideal for autonomy. It's long distance. It's done by teams right now, team drivers, which is like is most difficult to recruit for them, highest cost. Because the Postal Service doesn't have planes like Amazon and UPS, so they have to put it on the truck or pay a premium to put it on a plane. And so they challenged us to do that pilot, and then it's no secret. I mean, the power of Texas, and then especially Fort Worth and the Dallas area when it comes to freight. And it is folks that have followed this, and my business team will probably not like me, but I'll give a shout out to our competitors that have made announcements. Aurora, Waymo, Kodiak. I mean, Texas is quickly becoming mecca for autonomous trucks and other modes as well, as your questionnaire called out. So yeah, it's been I consider Russell a friend. Obviously, we have some business together in the future, but it's an exciting time to be in Texas and putting some roots down as well.
Yeah, Hayden, I'd like to add to that, and I can link in everyone. So a little background for how long we've been pursuing the automation world as it relates to mobility. About 5 years hard. Behind the scene, our partner Deloitte and their global mobility practice have been inside our business for a good 3 years now, helping us really pivot from traditional surface transportation and air, that includes rail, to what are we going to do in the future. And what this audience should know about the Texas market, and particularly the North Texas market, is that you have an outstanding educational academic research organization of universities here, including UTA. You have a state that has said we're open for business. You have a right to work state, and you have a facility called Alliance Texas that does not exist anywhere in the world. And that is a Class 1 intermodal facility, BN, a Cat 3 airport that is 11,000 foot, parallel runways, industrial airport, and interstate connectivity across, the central part of the country. Most importantly, in terms of knitting that, private ownership of 27,000 acres, which allows you to knit together disparate uses and enterprises that we're talking about today. So think about why TuSimple is here. Think about why Bell Technologies is launching their product. Uber Elevate, Aurora, I've heard mentioned. There are many, many others. They're here because of all of those reasons, and they want to be in Dallas-Fort Worth. So our leadership, that's our political leadership, our educational. Texas has about a 2-year window to dominate the commercialization of technology, head start on the country because of everything I just described. So commercializing and turning this technology into money, that'll drive reinvestment. And it's very, very, very true what I just described in terms of the enterprise here. So one last thing I'd like to say, so knit together all of this. Think of a 1 million square foot facility. A 1 million square foot facility, Ashley, check my math, drives about 15,000 to 20,000 containers a year. That's a need. That's an intermodal container that's coming in from LA Long Beach. The drayage cost for those 20,000 containers on a 1-3, let's call it 5 mile range in my world here is somewhere between $75 to $200, depending on spot market on the day. That includes driver, that includes 2 baton handoffs, switching, gates, all that stuff. So you heard Ashley's put in automated gates. You heard Robert, automated trucking. Now we have the connectivity of that one handoff. You can save 40% on a container movement in that ecosystem I just described. That's easy. We know we can get to 50 to 60 once drivers become, replaced in that scenario. So do that across now 2 million lifts for Berlin to Northern, and it's North Texas economic system. You guys are the really smart guys. You can do the math and tell me what that does to a value proposition for goods delivery. It's very, very real what we're witnessing right now and why they're here. Ashley, would you concur with my math and my comments?
I won't argue your math, Russell. But I absolutely, Alliance is one of our largest and fastest growing facilities. And as such, we're completing a multi-year expansion project at the facility and want to make even more of a state-of-the-art facility than it already is. And, we certainly think with our facilities, similarly, we have logistics from Chicago and logistics. Our logistics park centers allow us to really have a good testing ground to autonomous technologies further with the proximity of the hub to our truck carriers, as well as the customers and the case.
Yeah, I mean, the environment is here. I mean, it is happening. It's not something of the future. It is really working in all of those myriad of ways. And something, Russell, that you touched on, there's actually two things that I want to kind of touch on before we kind of get to additional audience questions, was the reinvestment in the funding. There's a lot of eyes on North Texas and Texas in general, especially the federal government, that's looking at investing in getting the technologies rapidly ready out of the lab into the market. Once it's in the market, scaling up. And Nick, and I know this is something that you're looking at, of kind of the federal dollars that are becoming available or have been available for these types of technologies. What is it looking like for you over at UTARI?
So from my perspective, we do go after research funding from federal government, from National Science Foundation, from Department of Defense. Some other groups that would be working on this would be Department of Energy. Those types of funding are, to be honest, fairly small, but they're enough for the types of things we work on, which are also, somewhat small scale problems where we might have, 3 or 4 people working on them, and a time frame of 1 year to maybe 3 years at most. So these are rather smaller scale projects. Then the other avenue that you'll start to see is the small business research initiatives that will come out of, again, NSF, DoD, all these same federal agencies. And these are directed directly at small businesses. Oftentimes there is a partnership with a local university. These are kind of actually shorter term, 6 months, smaller even funding, but you're establishing a proof of concept or ground truth in order to further develop your business idea and your technology. And once you pass that stage, if you can get into the next stage, now you're talking millions of dollars. So to be honest, I don't know what the big scale picture is in terms of how much funding is available from the federal governments, but these are the mechanisms that we will often look at. One thing that we are seeing that's more interesting is the DoD pushing more into commercialization of technology to the public markets without a direct interest in military applications, but just with the specific military application, with the understanding that this will percolate over to their needs. So we had recently received a lot of people talking to us about a program called Agility Prime that was launched by the Air Force, and it was directly towards urban air mobility, which is one topic we haven't really, or Russell briefly mentioned it, I believe, but this is, you also mentioned Uber Elevate. So this is the idea that we could have large movement of people and goods using autonomous air vehicles. And there was a big push for this. Yeah, just with the understanding that the Air Force is pushing this, but what do they need? They need to have these goods delivered out to people in the field or to, remote bases, but they don't want to develop the technology themselves, but they'll trust businesses in order to develop these things. And then when they need it, it's mature, and then they can take it for the military needs.
So Hayden, I might be able to add a little bit to that piece of it, and I think Nick is spot on that there's more of an appetite by the federal government to invest in technology outside of DoD applications, although that's still the largest driver, and I think Nick would agree with that. But it's happening. But you ask the question, how much money is coming into this space? Companies like TuSimple's original founder today, it's driven by almost a $1.5 trillion logistics market. It's a massive market, and there is a lot of room for people to find ways to capture value, right? So there's almost $4 to $5 billion every year rolling into automation technology and automobiles. Going in before pandemic, worldwide parcel delivery number was about 120 billion. Coming out of the pandemic, we would tell you that number's closer to 170. And a lot of people say my wife's responsible for about 25 billion in those packages. I don't know, but the point being, e-commerce has demonstrated to the country where our weakness is right now. And it was in our logistics and supply chain, and it has accelerated the focus by the federal government and companies like TuSimple, research institutions and universities like UTA, and then of course the long haul guys like BN, to accelerate the adoption and investment in technology because of what we learned in the last 7 months. So it is following the money being invested currently today, and it's significant money showing up.
Yeah, and just to kind of echo what both Nick and Russell laid out, the power of what governments can do when it comes to kind of unleashing public sector dollars. Prior to, Texas, definitely open for business from an autonomous vehicles perspective, but from an automated trucking perspective, till 2018, there was a lot of clouds around what would happen. Could an autonomous truck cross state lines? And then in 2018, there was, I should take one sec. Under the Obama administration, AV 2.0 was definitely like a good guiding document. And then during under the leadership of Lane Chow, AV 3.0 came out, and it provided a guidelines for heavy truck. And in 2018, it was ourselves, Embark, and Otto, which was purchased by Uber and then closed down. So it was a very, very small group. And then since that document, there's been, Freightliner, Daimler, Volvo, 6 new startups, companies like Waymo and Aurora that were focused on pass car, now, making public statements about, trucks. And we're talking billions and billions of private capital dollars being invested in this technology. And you're 100% right. This is a crazy statistic I learned from my friends over at the Marine Corps when they're having conversations about this technology. They're saying more American soldiers die in transportation accidents than they do in combat. And just because of the safety around it just blew my mind. And so, there is a big appetite, from a defense perspective on this, from the safety perspective, what this can support America's warfighter and keep people safe. But the power of government to enable, and what Russell has set up and team and the whole ecosystem that's set up in Texas, really allows companies like ourselves to, 1, raise capital, and 2, innovate and bring and ensure Texas is a first mover. It's no surprise that our partner Navistar announced, I know it's not Dallas Fort Worth, but they announced their new factory in San Antonio to build that next generation truck, for folks like ourselves and electric vehicle platform. So just again echoing, Texas's leadership in this type of transportation is impressive.
Then we had a question come in, actually, are we familiar with any legislative working groups across the state or here in North Texas that have formed around this subject?
I'll take the first stab at that's local, because I think it involves 2 of us here, and then Robert's got some really good insight to state. So most of the audience would be familiar with the Tarrant Regional Transportation Coalition, which is a group of advocates, largely elected officials, that's been doing transportation work, for a good 12 years now. I think we first set it up. We had 1 private sector member. That has been expanded to 5 now. So those new private sector board members leading sort of how do you get our legislative body to adopt and really embrace the new technologies. That includes Bell, that includes BNSF, Hillwood, Lockheed, and there'll be a couple of others that we'll put on there. The point of that is you now have private sector companies that are headquartered here in North Texas that are leaning into mobility innovation, both in the air side and the surface side, that are leading back over through our MPO, our discussion on how to integrate and adopt these technologies. That's happening locally. So we have a great history of doing that out of the Tarrant County side.
And then just a shout out to our friends at Texas DOT. For anyone that's interested in joining, it's the Connected and Automated Vehicle Task Force, also referred to as CAV. If you go to their website, they have working groups on what we're doing, on safety, on middle mile, last mile. It's from the top down, but Darren Anderson and Zeke have done a tremendous amount of leadership, along with Texas DPS as well. So if you have any interested partners, we have regular meetings, white papers, potential research projects, so looking at, Texas DOT and the CAV is a great resource from looking at kind of a statewide perspective, bringing in legislators and industry and safety advocates and law enforcement. So it's a good sandbox to work in for this space.
Yeah, and with this being a leadership outlook, and Russell, you hinted at this, what is it like, and Ashley, we talked about this kind of the culture at BNSF, what's it like for a leader to look to embrace and potentially adopt kind of autonomous solutions within transportation, logistics, mobility, and paying attention to this, of the impact that it'll have on their businesses and their employees and everybody that they serve?
Sure, yeah, and I think, we kind of joke about this, that you don't always put railroad and innovation in the same sentence. There might be surprised to see ourselves as an innovative company. I think that starts with the leadership and leaning into technology and continuing to challenge the status quo. We've always seen leadership is very significant to our success in all aspects of our business, including building a culture for innovation. And one way that we do that is by having a leadership model be part of our core tenet. And it's not just a model for leaders, it's a model really for everyone, that everyone lives by within the BNSF. And we're actually trained on that model instead of training each year. So having that kind of at our core, I think helps with the adoption and the creativity mindset that has enabled us to be successful in managing and bringing these new technologies to the world.
Ashley's being modest. BNSF is absolutely one of the most innovative companies we've ever worked with. And most people look at a railroad and go, what are they doing? They're dumpy, they haul coal. They don't. For your audience, just know that BNSF has been operating the longest on-visual line of sight accepted flying under the FAA in the U.S., almost 7+ years now. And that's a lot longer than Google Wing, a lot longer than you name any of the other U.S. BN's been doing it. So they really are leading this thing. But to the employee side of it, I'd be interested in Robert and maybe Ashley and Nick in terms of folks you deal with in our world, whether it's our customers or inside our company. Our young employees are embracing technology at breakneck pace, right? They're comfortable with it. They expect it. And now you're seeing that not in a convenience item like an iPhone. Now you're seeing it in our business environment at all levels. So it's the funnest thing we've ever done. Look, we've been building real estate for 30 years. Now we get to do some fun stuff. It's really awesome. And I know the research side and the academic side of it, seeing that also.
Nice. And Robert, there was a question that kind of puts you on the spot. Is hopefully you're prepared for this one. I have no doubt you are. With self-driving trucks happening in the U.S., what education and training should truck drivers attempt to do to stay employable in the truck industry?
Yeah, great question. And it's something that we have had since our founding, which I think is important. A part of every startup company wants to be disruptive, right? But we've always thought of ourselves wanting to be a positive disruption, and we worked with and shout out to Tucson. I know we love Texas, but what Tucson and Arizona did when we first moved there is create an environment for workforce development, workforce readiness. So we partnered with our local community college in Tucson, and we actually they just had their first 10 graduates of this program. It is a first of its kind. It's training truck drivers in an autonomous certificate program to, one, work for companies like TuSimple, and two, at scale, interact with these vehicles. Because when BN has thousands of autonomous trucks, you still need humans to be a part of this ecosystem. Whether it's inspection, handling roadside, monitoring the vehicles from a connectivity, health and safety perspective. So this is the first of its kind, and it's actually a program I know there's an appetite in Dallas or to bring, because a lot of people are like, what do you tell truck drivers? What are you going to teach them how to code? No, we're going to teach them, they're the best people we could hire to do what they do, but just a little. It's a 12-unit course at the community college through the truck driving school to prepare them for the future. You know, my younger cousin who's 25 is a truck driver, and you know, he loves this type of stuff. You know, but he grew up with iPhones and video games and that kind of stuff. When I'm talking to an over-the-road truck driver at 45 and he has concerns about this, I say, don't be concerned, because you know, I'm supposed to be the most bullish person in this world about this technology. But when you look at, you know, deployment, where it will be, and scale, you know, no one will lose their job from this. Hopefully, this makes the future jobs better, and letting companies compete for talent and recruit young people into trucking, because, you know, depending on who you talk to, but anyway, the average age of a truck driver is anywhere between 49 to 55, depending on Department of Labor statistics, and that's not a good thing. As our economy is switching more and more to e-commerce, and I don't need to tell Ashley how difficult it is to build more rail, you're going to need to increase that capacity from a trucking perspective. And so I tell truck drivers, if you want to drive, you will drive, you know, until you retire. And again, hopefully, you know, our technology is a supplement to you. It's not a replacement of you. And happy to take things offline with folks if they have any questions about that program. And again, bringing it to Dallas. I know you have a couple members of Congress that are very excited about that. Even in the failed HR2, you had strong leadership at the federal level, calling out workforce dollars for programs like that for folks that want to either around automation. So again, you know, being a positive disruption. And we understand it's not a silver bullet, but, you know, companies like TuSimple and other innovators are needed to be a part of that. We're not going to be that company that just, what is that Facebook adage, you know, move fast and break things. You know, that's not what you should do with autonomous vehicles, whether it is from a societal impact or from a safety impact. You know, working within your ecosystem, working with the best partners, that's how you create a positive disruption in our space.
Great answer, Robert. Very, very nice.
Yeah, and for those in the small businesses that are working in the logistics world, there's a question kind of like, how do you recommend that they start to shift their business model in order to stay competitive and in business and operations?
So is this like the small or the medium-sized shippers, mm-hmm. I would assume? Yeah, I mean, you know, as the total addressable market, we want to address those folks as well. So, you know, from a TuSimple perspective, there's kind of two different, you know, I wouldn't call them tiers, but two different kind of go-to-markets. There's the UPSs of the world that have a volume, that, you know, can satisfy us mapping that technology to their doorstep because they have the throughput. But, you know, the majority of shippers aren't UPS. You know, there's only a handful of UPSs out there. There's only a handful of BNs out there. So what do you do with the rest of the market? So creating terminals around DFW market, right? You know, that autonomous vehicles can be deployed from, and they can, and small to medium-sized shippers can benefit from that, you know, as Russell called, that 30 to 40%, you know, drop in cost. You know, so autonomy can benefit all. It's not just, you know, for the UPSs of the world. It is for, you know, that smaller and medium-sized folks to benefit. You know, if that asset owned by U.S. Express, you know, is most likely, or, you know, who owns that asset, you know, will still be determined. But, you know, having access to capacity is our core competency, and it's what, you know, the TuSimple Autonomous Freight Network will provide. You know, today, you know, as with our human safety drivers behind it, but obviously, you know, in 2024 and beyond, you know, with driverless operations.
Yeah, Hayden, let me pile on to that a little bit, because I think this is illustrative for all the panel members here in terms of our businesses. So Robert is absolutely spot on. You'll have many, we'll call them transfer truck yards, all right? So you see them today, and they look like container yards around big intermodal facilities. They're nasty, dirty. That's not what these are. These are automated transfer yards, seamless baton handoff. So there's lots of research and R&D work to be done around that technology. For us to support a population in North Texas that goes to 15 million by 2045, that means we have to almost triple our intermodal goods movement into this region, both between BN and UP, our two Class 1 rails. For that to happen, we have to move those goods out of those Class 1 railroad intermodal yards. They got to get out the front door. They got to get someplace. And that's where Robert and businesses like Robert TuSimple will be operating from. And that's the opportunity for all of the mid-logistics-based companies, so shipping companies, overseas, to really base their operations around. So forward thinking about how do I end up in a cluster around those transfer yards, as opposed to traditional thinking, I want to be right outside the intermodal yard, right? Different sort of fabric and organization of real estate platform today. Now, what's left out of that is the integration of all of this, technology in roadways, gates, 5G, optimized signalization, and just the technology inside the transfer of these warehouses. What does that mean? A lot of R&D left to be done in this world, at least from my position. So hope that helps knit that together in terms of how that works.
Yeah, and to continue, like, build that culture of continual innovation and evolving your business model. Continue looking at the macroeconomic forces and how that impacts you. Actually, whenever we wrap up this event, I'm jumping right in to work with 3 companies on their very business models as they're evolving. And so it really is that culture. I mean, if you can see that BNSF is setting this intention culture to kind of really adopt new technologies, increase the capabilities and capacity, and you see smaller startups launching and improving those models, and then the research that's coming out of the labs that are making a direct impact in the marketplace as well and in society. I mean, it's really having that culture that is absorbing, creating a sponge, and synthesizing all of this information in a pathway forward. And so one question that did come out, and I'm really excited to hear y'all thoughts on it, is at what pace is the rest of the world moving with regard to automation and autonomous solutions?
There are several. Go ahead, Robert. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. We're leading. I mean, right now, from our friends across the pond in Europe, we have a great relationship with Traton. We announced a pilot project in Sweden with them. Other folks like Volvo and others. But there is I would say maybe a fast follower approach from Europe. Obviously, China, there's a lot from a talent perspective. Incredible amount of talent coming out of China from computer vision and machine learning folks, but luckily we get to take advantage of a lot of that. But they don't have the regulatory environment for that the U.S. does. So the U.S. does have a leadership position. Not that we can't get caught and can't get passed by, because there are countries and regions aggressively pursuing this. Australia is doing some great stuff. Our friends, our neighbors to the north, Canada, are very interested in this type of technology. So it definitely won't just be U.S. long term. It will be a global transformation of how goods are moved. There's even some great stuff that like ports and container ships are doing in the world of automation. So it is really the golden age to be in transportation. If I have 2 young boys, I mean, it is a space that is both exciting, cutting edge technology, but you're also you get to contribute to folks, whether it's food insecurity or moving those medical masks. Whoever can move goods most efficiently and have stable capacity is going to be cement themselves as a global leader. And folks like BN and UPS and others that are part of Russell's sandbox that he's curated, are true leaders in making sure Texas is a part, in our federal system, right? Texas is leading the way as well.
Yeah, and Nick, what are some of the trends that you're seeing and paying attention to?
Well, I would be curious about Robert's perspective that one area I think we may be behind in is in smart infrastructure, that there's stuff in Europe and in Asia in terms of instrumented highways that, change traffic flow based on demand that I have not seen in the US. And that's one area where you might have heard some acronyms around a V2V and V2I. So this is vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure, where there could be really tremendous benefits of autonomous vehicles when They can communicate with each other and communicate with the roadways around them to understand traffic patterns that are going on down, to be rerouted, to have their speed regulated such that now you have smooth flow through an area rather than stop and go traffic on the highway. So we could drastically improve commute times, reducing pollution, et cetera. So actually, I'd be curious what Robert's thoughts are on
that. I mean, at first blush, I would say definitely from an infrastructure perspective. I mean, the U.S. is like well behind. I would say, you know, our folks in Asia. I mean, I don't know if the audience has been over there, especially with, you know, public transportation, moving people. You know, but from an actual deployment of technology, I would say we still have a pretty healthy leadership perspective. Because then I go back, you know, to at least for, you know, heavy truck, we are not reliant on that. And then, you know, from a deployment perspective and you know, it's to our benefit, you know, to deploy these in the middle of the night and miss that rush hour traffic, or you know, our fleet partners and such. Europe has done some great stuff from a safety infrastructure perspective. You know, their road to zero, you know, from their guardrails and how they engineering design is really second to none. But from a, you know, straight kind of you know, arms race or space race when it comes to automation, I would, you know, I think in most would say the U.S. is still in that leadership position. You know, like I said, not that things can't change, you know, over the next 10, 15 years, but you know, not just Robert, but I think most analysts and stuff like that would agree, you know, the U.S. is in the lead.
Well, and Ashley, any behind the scenes look at what BNSF is looking at today for tomorrow and what they're kind of really evolving into with this?
Yeah, I think one of the items I touched on at the beginning of the panel around the use of the auto strap is kind of the upcoming and tests that we're running, and will be more decisions next year. That really is a neat technology and something to watch out for, I would say. Then we've been exploring you know, different tools that our customers can use to better manage their shipments, and we've had many different tools out there over the last several years, but we just actually launched a tool. It's really neat. It takes advantage of the geofencing technology to allow customers to track their shipments and receive updates while en route when they set those boundaries up. So there's just so many different things that the technology can do to help facilitate the customer experience, and we have teams that are dedicated. And as Russell graciously, you know, talked about the innovative nature of BNSF, that's something that I think is really going to continue, and we hope to lead those efforts.
Yeah, and it makes me think of so many other industries too. I mean, you start to look at these things, and it's reducing friction in operations for the companies and individuals. But I love that you brought up the customer's experience with this technology and seeing that kind of transparency and what's happening and kind of that expectation now within tracking all of those pieces. So we've got some final questions coming in. I know we're getting really close on time, and I'm going to save my final question. There's another one around autonomous trucks. Is the movement towards autonomous trucks something more efficient in the long run compared to actual drivers?
From a sustainability perspective,
maybe
the angle they're asking about the environmental. Yeah, so we did a study a couple years back with the University of California, San Diego, comparing our manually driven trucks to our autonomous vehicles, and they came out with about a 10% improvement, which might not seem like a lot to folks, but when you're talking, you know, diesel and the amount of output, you know, internal combustion diesel engine puts out, it is quite substantial. We've backed that up and validated it with some of our own internal tools with our friends over at UPS. So it's basically the autonomous vehicle drives that internal combustion engine a lot more efficiently than a human will. You know, from a fleet, if there's any fleet people out there, it's thinking, you know, they know who their best drivers are, and you know, not hitting the brakes, using the engine brake, you know, understanding, you know, where you're going and what you're going to encounter, not rushing to get home, right? You know, to soccer practice, that kind of stuff. So the robot doesn't care, it will get there the safest and most efficient way possible. So yeah, while I am a huge fan of alternative fuels, definitely that long haul, trucking will probably be the last to go zero emissions or electrification just based on the use case. But there is some interesting things that you can marry with, right? That we can solve that long haul middle mile with an internal combustion, diesel engine, but maybe, those last mile local pickup and deliveries can be done by an electric vehicle, your man or driven truck. So yes, short term, yes, there's definitely improvements, but long term, I think it'll be kind of the last, internal combustion engine that we'll have as everyone moves to, zero emission vehicles for the next 10, 15 years.
I've got two questions in the chat that I'm going to combine into one, and it's pointing towards safety. So what are the significant progress that could be pointed to around self-driving vehicles and regards to safety, and who is responsible for the accidents that are caused with these technologies?
You have a very sophisticated audience. These are some great questions. And to be frank, people talk about road to zero and stuff. Autonomous vehicles they're going to get in accidents, but we hope at a much lesser rate. The statistics, from DOT perspective, around 90% of accidents are human caused. Granted, autonomous vehicles introduce, new risks in areas where things could go wrong. But the vehicle doesn't get distracted, it doesn't get angry, it doesn't text, doesn't drink. It is the basically again, it goes back to the safest, most efficient decision, and does that 20 times per second. Building the world around it. And then when they do get into accidents, and even I'll go there, right? The worst mark on our industry when Elaine Hertzberger was struck and killed in Tempe, Arizona, you can read the NTSB report, and the amount of transparency that you have around these accidents is incredible. It was a very sad day, and for the whole industry. But I like to remind people, and even my friends in Arizona always use that talking point. I believe they said they had 12 people struck and killed by motorists, not by autonomous vehicles that same weekend. But the amount of transparency that you'll have around these vehicles is incredible from an insurance perspective. It's a whole nother market that could potentially be positively disrupted, right? They'll know that down to the millisecond exactly what happened around that vehicle with cameras, with LiDAR data, with radar data, trajectories of all the other vehicles around it. Potentially law enforcement is interested in it from a Amber Alert perspective, right? These vehicles, that could, interact with law enforcement. Also from a trafficking perspective, if you remove the human element out of moving these goods across border, you're removing an element that can either be threatened or bribed to move trafficking, whether it's human or narcotics. So we're just in the beginning. I have a feeling in 10 years we're going to be like, wow, we had no idea what type of influence, whether it was a societal or economic, that these type of technology would bring. But yeah, great questions, from the audience. Oh yeah, and it would be us. I think the last part of the question is who would be responsible. Navistar will make that truck. They'll service it. It'll be completely served, through the Navistar pipeline. But just as a driver would, a CDL holder today, be responsible and held liable for an accident. TuSimple as that virtual driver would as well. So sorry, long-winded answer, but it's a great question.
You're good, and we're real close on time. Any final moments on the safety? I've got one final question I want to throw out to all of y'all.
Yeah, I would qualify for Robert. He's talking about the ecosystem we know today. Back to Nick, once we get to V2V, that is an interoperability network communication platform that brings in an entirely different dimension that we haven't even gotten to yet today. So backhaul, edge computing, et cetera, different.
Yeah, so there's some other really great questions. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Continue these conversations. I think networking is going to be opening up right after the closing comments. And a final question to each of our panelists. For those that are really interested in this conversation, or not even just really, just have an appetite to learn more about this, what are the recommendations? Where to go, what to read, who to follow, what stories to track that are top of your mind and that you would pass on to others?
I would show up at Alliance, Texas, and the University of Texas at Arlington.
There's a good amount of information on the Mobility Innovation Zone website.
You bet.
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in autonomous vehicles, you know, there's tons of information. Obviously, great blogs out there, some great podcasts, the Autonocast. You know, obviously, all of our company's websites provide information on, you know, how we test and what we do and where we're going next. And if you go to YouTube, you can watch some fun videos of us, you know, hauling freight in Texas and Arizona, New Mexico, to say the least. And you know, so if you're interested in it, like I said, you know, our websites, and also, you know, at USDOT has information as well, kind of not just TuSimple, but the company as the companies as themselves on how where you see deployments across the country.
Yeah, and I would add, follow BNSF on social media. We're very active on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and you'll see a lot of articles and postings about the latest technologies, what's going on the railroad and across the network. So that's a great avenue if you're interested in learning more about BNSF specifically and some of the items that we're working on.
Nick?
It's a difficult question to answer, actually, because there is just so much material that comes in from a lot of different places. I mean, from my perspective, I'm mostly reading academic journals and I'm going to conferences. I don't know how much that would interest a lot of people here. I know that we have a student group that is probably interested in pursuing these, and I'm happy to talk to them. I'm sorry I couldn't make it the beginning of the session, but I can stick around afterwards. Another just place where I oftentimes find interesting articles about this is Popular Mechanics, and you know, it's been around for 100 years or more, but they often they gather information from all these different industries, but you know, DoD advances that are going on to the major businesses. So that's one place where I just find a lot
great
of
actionable steps. Thank you, Ashley, Nick, Robert, and Russell. It's been a pleasure exploring this topic. I know hopefully planted seeds into all these people to continue the conversation and ask these same questions of each other, and probably blow up your inboxes as well, wanting to continue the conversation. So thank you to each of you, and thank you to Leadership Fort Worth. I think we're now going to leave the stage, and Ramon is going to come on for a little closing before the networking. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, guys. It was fun.
Ashley, Russell, and Nick, we really appreciate the insight you all delivered. This concludes this year's Leadership Fort Worth Leadership Outlook event. I want to thank everyone for attending. Thank you, Hillwood, for being our presenting sponsor. Thank you to UTA Goolsby Leadership Academy for being our leadership sponsor. Thank you to Mouser Electronics as our silver sponsor. And thank you to Frost Bank, UTARI, Texas Capital, KFM Engineering, K&L Enterprises, and Ramel Company for being our bronze sponsors. I also want to thank Todd and Lisa Miller and team for putting together this great topic and securing our fabulous panelists and our wonderful sponsors. Lastly, I want to thank our wonderful Tiffany Morgan for making this all happen. Everything you saw and experienced at this event was because of her. Thank you, Tiffany. You're talented, and we cannot thank you enough. I lastly wanted to mention that our expo and networking booths are going to reopen, so please explore at your leisure. To learn more about our programs or to apply, please visit our booth or go to leadershipfortworth.org. Earlier I said .com and it's .org. But thank you, everyone. This is it. We appreciate it. Have a good day.